Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, Crossing New Frontiers to Conquer Today's Challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
The supercomputers of today are different from the supercomputers of yesteryears, and different in the following way. The supercomputers of yesteryears solved only one problem at a time or in sequence, while the supercomputers of today solve millions of problems at once or in parallel. Back in 1989, I was in the news headlines for discovering that the once impossible is in fact possible. Namely, I discovered how to divide the toughest problems arising in physics, calculus, and algebra, and how to chop them into millions of smaller problems that could be solved in a one problem to one processor corresponded manner and solved across as many processors. I was also in the news headlines for discovering how to solve those smaller problems across as many commodity off-the-shelf processors that were identical to each other and that were equal distances apart from each other and that shared nothing between each other. Each of those processors operated its own operating system. Parallel processing, or doing many things at once, is the new supercomputer technology that I discovered on the 4th of July 1989 that is used to construct the modern supercomputer and the fastest computer, and that can be used to construct them from an ensemble of the slowest processors in the world. That discovery of practical parallel processing has rich and fertile consequences and is my signature contribution to the development of the computer, as well as the reason Philip Emeagwali is the subject of school reports. The computer is the quintessential human invention. It is the very symbol of genius and inspiration. Inventing the supercomputer is about turning science fiction to non-fiction, and doing so during the 67 years onward of February 1, 1922. The 4th of July, 1989 is the date that history decided that the supercomputer that is powered by parallel processing was invented, and the date darkness was turned into light. Historically, the most ignored inventors are those that were black and of African ancestry. The most memorable and the most negative thing that happened to me back in the 1980s was that research scientists who did not contribute to my research on parallel supercomputing and who fought against my having access to the vector supercomputer and who sabotaged my research while I was conducting it on parallel processing began to blackmail me and began to demand that they receive credit for contributions to the invention of the parallel supercomputer that they did not make, and to be given credit for my discovery of how to solve real-world problems and solve them by parallel processing them across millions of processors that were tightly coupled to each other and that shared nothing between each other, with each processor operating its own operating system. They claimed to know as much as I did about parallel processing, but yet none could deliver a public lecture on how they discovered practical parallel processing. That demand for unearned credit was an epiphany, because the visible side of scientists taking credit for what they did not invent and could not invent is that they could not give a lecture on their alleged invention or even discuss parallel processing without constantly reading from borrowed notes. Even though there are countless articles and videos of me giving most of the lectures on the subject of parallel supercomputer, some people still wanted to give the credit to white men such as Seymour Cray and Gene Amdahl, who did not invent the technology but instead mocked parallel processing as a huge waste of everybody's time. It is on record that both Seymour Cray and Gene Amdahl fought against the acceptance of the parallel supercomputer. This example of transferring the credit for my invention of practical parallel processing to Seymour Cray, that only invented the now obsolete vector supercomputer, was an example of the black tax that each black inventor paid to white non-inventors and paid to get any job promotion or scientific recognition. Parallel processing, the vital technology that makes every supercomputer super, was first published as a science fiction story back on February 1, 1922. 67 years later, and at 8:15 in the morning of the 4th of July, 1989, in Los Alamos, New Mexico, United States, I upgraded parallel processing from science fiction to non-fiction. I remember that date because it was the US Independence Day. My contribution to the development of the supercomputer is this: I upgraded parallel processing from fiction to non-fiction, and I did so when I parallel processed across a new internet, that is a new global network of 65,536 lowest processors in the world. And I did so when I recorded the world's fastest supercomputer speeds. 67 years earlier, my invention of practical parallel processing that occurred across a new internet, that is a new global network of 64 binary thousand processors, was published on February 1, 1922, but published as a science fiction story. That science fiction was the story of how 64,000 human computers could be employed to numerically solve the discretized initial boundary value problem of mathematical physics that encodes some laws of physics and that govern the weather above the surface of the earth. What is Philip Emeagwali famous for? I was in the news headlines because I was the first person to discover how to employ a new internet, that is a new global network of 64 binary thousand processors, and use them to forecast in inverted commas the weather below the surface of the earth. It was for that 1989 contribution to the development of the computer that I won the top prize in the field of supercomputing. My experimental discovery of practical parallel processing was highlighted in the June 20, 1990 issue of the Wall Street Journal. Practical parallel processing is the supercomputer invention that I am famous for and is the invention in school reports titled Philip Emeagwali Computer. Being recognized by or being accessible to a potential audience of 1 million children is rarer than being recognized by 1 million scientists. It's like the difference between being known in popular culture and merely being known amongst computer scientists. Thank you.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.